Remember how Cell didn't show up until part 8 of the Cell arc's dissection? It's part 2 and Frieza's here, baby. Well, he will be. By the end. Spoilers. Is that a good thing, though? I don't know. It's Dragon Ball Dissection. Last time we covered most of the introductory episodes that lead up to the events covered in the Resurrection F movie without ever really getting there. This time we open with Goku's and Vegeta's experiences training with Whis. These vignettes are incredibly charming. They remind me of Goku and Kuririn doing the Turtle School training way back in the day. Heck, the idea was already planted in my mind as Kuririn flashes back to those days. Right before the brain damage. Part of me wants to say this is another example of the franchise running out of ideas. How many wacky shenanigan training sequences can you do before it's all stuff we've seen before? Still, I think the show does enough to set it apart. For one, it has a different framing. Goku and Kuririn come into their wacky training shenanigans as an equal duo. They're both being surprised by what they're encountering. Here, we follow Goku's perspective, but not Vegeta's. We're new to this, as is Goku. Vegeta, however, has been here for 6 months, so he gets to be the voice of experience, the one introducing Goku and us to the dreadfully bizarre. They're on different footing, which means they react in different ways. Despite how familiar the concept is, there are still new ideas. The main set piece has the two changing Beerus' sheets while he sleeps, knowing that awakening him could result in unrestrained violence that could kill them both. On top of that, they are surrounded by hourglass bomb alarm clocks. I've dissected a lot of Dragon Ball over the years, but I've never had to say that sentence before. Classic Dragon Ball's training featured mundane tasks but amplified to ridiculous degrees, delivering milk, plowing fields. In essence, that's what's happening here too, but placed in a far more fantastic context. Changing the sheets of a mercurial violent god is mundane, but amplified. Having the arena placed by thematically appropriate proximity mines elevates it to whimsical. The show mines a surprising number of jokes from this premise. Technically, Vegeta claims this isn't the training, but simply the housework they do in exchange for the training. The actual training we see is the two having to outrun magically disappearing ground while carrying heavy weights. Still, I don't buy that navigating the sleeping god of destruction isn't quintessential Dragon Ball training. That's why I get a little bit irritated that Goku fails to see the value in activities like this. Years before he would shock the fandom by failing to see the value in meditation, despite having done it before, we're already starting to see Goku's precious few IQ points fall out of his unguarded ears. I give Dragon Ball Super credit for coming up with an engaging new form of comedic conditioning, but I don't buy for a second that Goku can't see the similarities between having to cut a daily regenerating field of grass and having to plow fields by hand. All of this is being done in service of this Goku-Vegeta dynamic, which I actually don't mind, to a point. It's snobs versus slobs. It's Vegeta as the straight man, Goku as the comic relief. I'm not saying it's perfect, especially not when Goku can't bring his usual level of intelligence to serious situations, but I can definitely see how these two characters are taken in these specific directions, and I find it charming most of the time, if a little flattened. It's such a small thing, but I really like the moment after Goku has gone to sleep that we see Vegeta still working with the weights on his own. Sure, Vegeta regularly pushes himself way too hard with training, but this feels different. Maybe it's the sweet music, or the fact that it follows a scene of Whis and the Oracle Fish discussing the student's progress, but for once, it doesn't feel like the usual Vegeta obsession or brooding. For once, I actually buy into the idea of Vegeta as a doomed underdog. Maybe it's because this is already reminding me of Goku and Kuririn, and how Kuririn would always struggle with things that were easy to Goku. But let's not forget that Vegeta came here 6 months before Goku in order to make up the difference. He's been able to learn the ropes on his own and train at his own pace. Now, suddenly, Here Goku is again, breathing down his neck. I feel so much vulnerability from Vegeta here. He's not being a selfish sack of crap, he's just being diligent, and I can respect that. Whis soon gives Goku a new dogi, his Resurrection F outfit. After all, Vegeta's clothes were a gift from his loving wife, but Goku's wife hates him, so Whis made him clothes instead. Hi, kid. Kinda. In fact, it's technically the opposite. Whis is explaining he would have made matching outfits for Goku and Vegeta, except that he didn't want to take away the clothes made by Vegeta's loving wife. So, yay. Now we have an explanation for the clothes they wear in the film. But I demand more clothes before I do a fashion extravaganza about it. Like in the movie, Whis brings up the concept of moving without thinking. I can't imagine any of us in 2015 knew how important a concept this would end up being. And as far as the franchise running out of new concepts to introduce goes, I have to give credit to this feeling like a true, worthy addition to the martial arts philosophies of Dragon Ball. The idea of reacting on instinct being a faster and more reliable method of fighting makes sense to me, and it feels as momentous a revelation as tracking movement without physical sight. Perhaps it's a bit too early for me to really discuss this, as it's going to become far more important in future arcs, but I am impressed to go back to the Dragon Ball Super era and remember how far in advance the series sets this up. And just like with Kuririn copying around all over the place, these events are moved earlier in the timeline than the movie version. Tying into that, I also want to bring up how the Oracle Fish points out that Vegeta is able to notice when Whis is on approach. In other words, he's beginning to be able to sense God Ki. Powers are powers, and Dragon Ball has so many of them it's sometimes hard for me to not just skim over them. In fact, I almost did just that for this. But then I started thinking about it. With the introduction of the Saiyans, Dragon Ball really begins leaning hard into biological determinism. What is the proliferation of Super Saiyan if not a declaration that only your biology matters? Characters like Goten and Trunks get to shoot ahead of established characters just because they were born the right way. Now we have God Ki, which is introduced as something only gods have and only gods can sense. But as we often see in Dragon Ball, being a god is not always an innate state of being. Dende becomes a god. Goku could have become a god, chooses not to, then later gets a transformation that temporarily makes him one. You can just stop being a demon clansman. So there is also a surprising focus in Dragon Ball on characters determining who they are, even when it comes to their state of being. I tend to prefer this, both for my own personal philosophies and because it fits much better with a martial arts story that has a message of continual self-improvement. But this one in particular is interesting. Because gods aren't innately gods, the idea that only gods can sense God Ki already opens itself up to be expanded to other characters. I'm guessing that Dende wasn't born with this ability, and now we see that Vegeta, just regular old Vegeta, is beginning to be able to sense it. Now, this is probably a hint of that new form we have already seen in the original movie of this, but I still find it an interesting thing to think about. Especially paired with Whis' instructions, Dragon Ball Super is laying groundwork for individual characters, especially Saiyans, but potentially not necessarily, to choose their own paths rather than to simply follow a prescribed route. This episode is not just the Goku and Vegeta show. It introduces Sorbet trying to lead the Frieza army, but struggling to maintain order amid rebelling populations. It also introduces Champa and Vados into the animated storyline. Vados blows up a planet for Champa, but it's not the one they thought it was. Now, these scenes are the animated equivalent of some of the manga scenes from the Battle of Gods storyline, just featured quite a bit later. I'd also say they're quite a bit less impactful. This version is far more direct with the Champa and Vados stuff. We see them blow up a planet from their own perspective rather than being drawn into this mystery through the Kaioshin happening to notice them. I find that much more memorable. Again, I love how Champa and Vados look into the other side of the crystal ball. The manga also draws a distinct connection between these characters and the Frieza characters. A Frieza ship sees something shocking. They say it's giant Dragon Balls, But before we can see what they see, Champa appears and kills them all. And it's this ship being wiped out that finally pushes Sorbet over the edge to resurrect Frieza. It feels natural and doesn't shrink the universe because they influence each other without ever realizing they do. Champa and Vados interact with Frieza forces in this episode too. They whoosh past Sorbet's ship. Sorbet wonders what that was. In the next episode, we see Sorbet and crew tending to a fire on their ship, but I'm honestly not sure if that's because of Champa and Vados or because of the uprisings they're fighting. And that's fine, these stories don't need to connect, but I prefer the manga on this one. While our first episode starts moving events towards where the movie begins, it's the next episode that finally reaches the plot of the movie. In fact, lots of scenes are taken directly from the movie. It opens taking us through a trip down to hell for Frieza and his cutesy tormentors. Whis marks Goku's and Vegeta's uniforms to show off his speed. Piccolo takes care of Pan. Obviously, I'm not going to relitigate all of those, but I did want to talk about something originating from the movie that always rubbed me the wrong way. Frieza refers to himself as having been in Earth's hell. Why would Earth have its own hell? Admittedly, there's been enough weirdness with the depiction of Dragon Ball's afterlife that it's certainly possible that each planet has its own hell. Back in the Frieza arc, I expressed my annoyance that the wish to save Krillin is to bring his soul to Earth rather than his remains, as I thought only the latter made sense within the context of Dragon Ball's established rules of death. However, if the concept was supposed to be that each planet has its own afterlife, then bringing Krillin's soul to Earth might make sense. Most of what we've seen of the afterlife, though, has suggested a singular multi-planetary location. Granted, most of what we've seen up to this point has been from Toei's version of Dragon Ball, but most of that is expanded from Toriyama's own concepts. After all, Goku learns fusion in the afterlife from an alien species. One of the very first things we learn about the afterlife is when God tells Goku that all beings come to Enma to be judged, even aliens. Maybe that's just referring to aliens who happen to die on Earth and Enma typically just judges Earthlings. Nope, that can't be the case given that in the Buu arc, Enma questions Goku as to why there's a sudden influx of dead people from Earth. So, no, I don't think there are multiple Enmas for all the different planets, nor do I think that it would make sense to bring all of the dead into one judgment line, only to separate them all back out again once they've been judged. I do not like this, and I would have been much happier if Dragon Ball Super had quietly removed the word Earths from Frieza's mentioning of Hell. It's not as if backtracking on the movie isn't something they know how to do. Strangely enough, for all that the movie adaptation arcs try to expand on the original movies, when it comes to the Pilaf involvement, the series actually shrinks it a bit. Rather than Sorbet forcing Pilaf and the others to find the last Dragon Ball for them, here Sorbet comes up on them right after they've collected the last Dragon Ball. Not a big deal either way, it's just weird. But what is a big deal is how many wishes Shenlong offers them when they use those Dragon Balls. See, in Battle of Gods, Shenlong grants only a single wish, that of telling the characters how to make a Super Saiyan God from scratch. And that just began this cascading problem of the number of wishes the Dragon Balls are supposed to grant at this point in the story. After all, this is supposed to be a canon movie. No, not a canon movie, although those are pretty fun too if you like terrible movies. So then we get to Resurrection F, where Shenlong grants 2 wishes, one for the titular resurrecting of F, and the other for Shu wanting a big stack of money. And Shenlong specifies in the dialogue that he can now grant 2 wishes due to an upgrade from the new god. Now, sometimes I'm really glad I do Dragon Ball Dissection. Sometimes I'm not. Trying to wrap my head around a coherent timeline for Dragon Ball Super is a hellish nightmare I wish I could escape from, particularly because of how this series uses the time-dependent Dragon Balls. But because of Dragon Ball Dissection, I already made an episode 5 years ago where I talked about how even original Dragon Ball didn't seem to know what it was doing regarding how many wishes these stupid spheres are supposed to grant. And it was really helpful to me to go back and watch my own video. Way to go, past me! In short, while the Cell arc almost certainly claims that Dende upgrades the balls to grant 2 wishes, we never actually see an example in the manga of Shenlong claiming that. Then, out of nowhere, the Boo arc suddenly says 3 wishes, then later covers its own ass, clarifies that what that means is that Shenlong normally grants 3 wishes, but that something big like a mass resurrection will count as 2 wishes, leaving a total of 2. In addition, the Boo arc establishes the concept of dismissing Shenlong before all the wishes are used, in which case the Dragon Balls will take less time to recharge, after which the remaining wishes from the previous cycle can be used. See, this is why Dragon Ball Dissection takes longer to get through arcs than it did when I started. It didn't take very long back when all I had to say was, you get the 7 Dragon Balls and you get a wish. Everything's so complicated now. Okay, so, in Battle of Gods, Shenlong grants 1 wish. He doesn't say anything about the possibility of granting multiple wishes. Did Resurrection F realize they made a mistake in the previous movie, only to immediately get it wrong again by remembering that scene from the Cell arc while forgetting the scenes from the Boo arc? That's certainly what Shenlong's dialogue in both movies makes it sound like, that the Battle of Gods Shenlong naturally grants 1 wish, the Resurrection F Shenlong naturally grants 2 wishes, and neither one of them would ever grant 3 wishes. But perhaps it was never a mistake at all. Maybe Shenlong takes the first opportunity to run like hell after seeing Beerus, because not granting wishes is something he can just choose to do. And because only 1 wish was granted before, that means he has 2 wishes left to grant. He doesn't volunteer this information to Sorbet because it would sound rather gauche to say, I will grant you any 2 wishes. It would normally be 3, but someone already took the first one and put me back on the shelf, so I'm actually a used product. If we accept that, everything now makes sense, right? Well, I guess Dragon Ball Super doesn't think so, because now in this version of events, Shenlong grants 3 full wishes. On top of the 2 from the movie, Mai wishes for ice cream. So, forget everything I just said, I guess. I already suspected all of this chaos was writers desperately trying to course correct, but this pretty much clinches it for me that they thought the 2 wishes thing was a mistake rather than a consequence. In fact, the show seems downright terrified to get this wrong again, as they have Shenlong laboriously and awkwardly explain, for no reason at all, that while he normally grants 3 wishes, a mass resurrection will limit it to 2. Yep, they're writing Shenlong as if he's a YouTuber terrified the comments section is about to hit him with a massive wave of you forgot-isms. And as someone plagued with the anxiety that can only come from doing YouTube for over 15 years, I can respect that. But holy crap, is this whole thing janky and complicated, and I don't want to think about it anymore. And even that isn't the last course correction Dragon Ball Super attempts. So another famous or infamous bit from Resurrection F is Frieza asserting he can improve himself in 4 months because he's literally never trained in his life and is simply naturally strong. Maybe I should go back to what I said earlier regarding biology as destiny. Now, do I think that this line of dialogue is a desperate excuse to justify how Frieza, who hasn't changed since the middle of the series, can suddenly become competitive amid the likes of Majin Buu and godly Super Saiyans? Oh, absolutely. You can quote me on that. I want to be angry at this, and I probably was 10 years ago. I find power such a boring subject. That is to say, I'm far more interested with what people do with power than them simply having power. So from that perspective, I want to argue that even if Frieza is born naturally gifted, that shouldn't be enough on its own. It should be like little Gohan throwing fits once in a while. Until he actually trains, his raw potential is not reliable or focused enough to be helpful. That's what Piccolo tells him, that's why Piccolo trains him. However, I also recognize that teaching specific martial arts disciplines and techniques has never been something Dragon Ball is focused on. The whole point of Goku and Kuririn training is that they realize their moves are just naturally baked into what they've been doing for the past 8 months. So in a world where everyone from dogi-wearing karate men to army generals to alien soldiers to interstellar real estate tycoons employ the same general repertoire of martial arts to resolve conflicts, I feel like I have to accept to a degree that this is just baked into the premise. But even Goku and Kuririn have to actually do some kind of training to learn the moves they didn't know they knew. So maybe I am still mad at this. I don't know. It's ludicrous, but whatever. However, the movie couples this with Frieza's assertion that with 4 months of training, he could reach a battle power of 1.3 million. And he says this as if it's supposed to be intimidating. I always felt this should come across as akin to Dr. Evil demanding $1 million to show how out of touch he's become in his absence. I don't even care about battle powers, and I always thought this sounded ridiculous. I mean, second form Frieza claimed to have instantly jumped from a battle power of 530,000 to over 1 million. And that was before his 2 other transformations, and then powering up to 100%, and then Super Saiyan outdoing that, and then years of other characters and transformations. You mean to tell me that all of that was contained between 1 million and 1.29 million? Well, I guess Dragon Ball Super doesn't think so because they cut that line out. Frankly, it's all the better for it. Battle powers really don't need to return to Dragon Ball, but especially not if they're this incomprehensible. If the Resurrection F arc has taught me anything thus far, it's that Dragon Ball Super exists to walk back mistakes. It doesn't matter if they bring the plot to a complete halt, they're going to dish the corrective exposition. And that makes it even more infuriating that they can never seem to explain Pilaf. I mean, if you're already going to have Shenlong explain how and why his wishes change, why not just throw in a line where he notices Pilaf, Shu, and Mai and says, "Hey, you guys are back again. Did you get tired of being children after I granted that wish to make you children?" I mean, it wouldn't be more awkward than any of the rest of this stuff. Well, I think that's enough for now. If this remains the arc of corrections, we might be here for a while, but I'll try to be as nice as I can. After all, I always hope you'll be nice to me when I make the occasional mistake, especially since I try my hardest not to. But something that's never a mistake is watching every single episode of Dragon Ball Dissection. Did you know that this is the 196th installment? I didn't know. I had to look it up. Now I do. It's very convenient that I have a playlist that tells me that, and I have playlists of Dragon Ball Dissection broken up into different categories. Whether you want the original manga or the movies or GT, I have you covered. So give them a watch. Maybe you'll be done by the time I come back for the next installment of Dragon Ball Dissection, or even before my next non-Dragon Ball video. I put out a new video every other Monday, so it should be impossible to miss. Even though it somehow is. But now you know, because you stayed until the end of the video. You're still here, right? Yeah, okay. Bye.